Tonight, Black Lives Matter. The global movement comes to Australia in rallies across the country.
Justice is coming!
But there are concerns a lack of physical distancing will risk the health of Victorians.
It's really disappointing that there weren't other safer ways to send a powerful message about this issue than gathering in a mass protest that is putting public health at risk.
Also tonight, the writings on the road, a message to President Trump just metres from the White House. And travel bans won't stop these weary travellers as they prepare for an epic journey. Good evening, Paul Higgins with ABC News. Well, it might not have reached the predicted numbers, but thousands of people defied coronavirus warnings to march through Melbourne's CBD. The Black Lives Matter protest followed similar protests in the United States, but there was none of the violence or property damage seen in US cities as the protest moved peacefully from State Parliament through the city to Flinders Street. And while police still plan to fine the organisers for breaching COVID-19 directions, those who took part are hoping their message did get through. Elias Kluwer reports.
It's a global movement making plenty of noise, but today's Black Lives Matter rally in Melbourne began with a minute's silence. They were told not to come, but they came out in force.
432 deaths. That's one every single month for 29 years.
About 10,000 people defied COVID-19 restrictions to protest on the steps of Parliament in solidarity with global demonstrations sparked by the death of George Floyd and seeking justice much closer to home for the Indigenous Australians who have died in custody.
It took the murder of George Floyd, an African-American man, to put the spotlight on Australia's shame.
No, Mr. Morrison! Australia is not the United States, but Australia does have its own long, dark, brutal past of oppression.
People did what they could to stay safe, but maintaining 1.5 metres distance wasn't quite as easy.
I'm willing to risk my health so that another black person isn't killed in custody.
I don't want to put anyone at risk, but I just feel like we have to be here.
I made sure that none of my elders came with me to make sure that they're not at risk of getting this.
This is a much bigger problem than a few hundred people dying from coronavirus. This has been going on for 250 years, oppression, so I want that to stop, and I'm here to fight that.
It's really disappointing that there weren't other safer ways to send a powerful message about this issue than gathering in a mass protest that is putting public health at risk.
No justice! No peace! No justice!
As the rally pulsed through the streets of Melbourne, regional towns across Victoria were also showing support. In Mildura, about 200 people gathered. These aren't the first Black Lives Matter rallies in Melbourne, and this movement now is about 6 years old. But the organisers say that with the backdrop of the pandemic, they're hoping these protests can affect some kind of change.
No justice, no peace! It's great people are supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, but you need to support this after this whole situation.
Victoria Police maintained a large presence throughout the event. The protest moved through Melbourne peacefully and ended with a traditional smoking ceremony.
Always was, always will be.
And Elias Kluwer joins us now from Flinders Street Station, where that rally has just wrapped up. Elias, what have the police had to say about today's protest?
Yeah, good evening, Paul. Well, the crowd has dispersed, but they were at this intersection behind me for about an hour after the rally. So police say they are generally happy with the behaviour of demonstrators. There's been no reports of property damage or violence, and they made no arrests, but they are concerned that this event went ahead in the first place in defiance of Chief Health Officer guidelines and social distancing rules. They've now moved to issue $1,600 fines to each of the organisers and say it'll investigate further if any more sanctions or penalties should be imposed. Now, we've spoken to the organisers a short time ago who say they have no comment and nothing to add. So I guess we'll see how this pans out in the coming days. Paul?
Elias Kluwer at Flinders Street. Elias, thank you. Rallies were also held in other states today. In Sydney, the protest was declared legal just before the scheduled start after a last-minute Court of Appeal ruling. Police dealt with one counter-protester, but the demonstration was peaceful. In South Australia, the rally went ahead with the blessing of police, supporting the right of people to have their say. And more than 20,000 people crammed into Brisbane's city centre in one of the biggest protests Queensland has seen in decades. Today's rallies put Australia's own record of deaths in custody at the forefront of national debate. But for those who fought for the Royal Commission into the issue decades ago, it's been bittersweet. As Indigenous Affairs correspondent Isabella Higgins reports, many are dismayed by the lack of progress.
Susie Dixon's family might look like any other at today's protests. But for them, this cause is deeply personal and dates back decades.
It's had a huge impact on our whole family when we lost our brother in custody in the old Adelaide jail in 1987.
This is Susie grieving the loss of her 19-year-old brother Kingsley more than 30 years ago. His death was reported as a suicide, but the family were suspicious of the circumstances.
While the 200 mourners crowded into St Paul's Church and spilled outside into the car park,
the family allowed media into the funeral to show Australia the real impacts of deaths in custody. Kingsley's mother, Alice, showed deep resolve in her moment of grief, using the opportunity to make a plea for action.
This is 45 deaths now. How many more do they want the Aboriginal people to wait for? 45 deaths? Do they want another 45 before they listen to us?
Just weeks after the funeral, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody was announced. 4 years later, when the final report was handed down, Alice Dixon was hopeful.
They never will go far enough, but this gives us, for the first time, white and black Australia, an agenda, an instrument, those Royal Commission recommendations.
Alice Dixon's fight came at a cost. She ended her life about a year after the commission wrapped. Today, her family gathered at the commemorative tree named in her honour.
She would be dismayed at the number of deaths that have happened since the Royal Commission of Death in Custody. I think that she was calling, for change. The change hasn't happened.
At today's rallies, many called for the Royal Commission's 339 recommendations to be revisited. A recent government report found just 64% of the Royal Commission's recommendations had ever been enacted. While international events have put a renewed attention and focus on deaths in custody, for many families, this is an age-old problem.
Can you see that picture of Uncle King? Yep.
For those who've lost so much waiting for change, today was a show of solidarity, but not a solution. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, Sydney.
The Mayor of Washington, D.C. has taken the fight for control of her city to the doorstep of the White House. An enormous Black Lives Matter mural has been painted on the street leading to the White House. It was ordered by the city's mayor as a rebuke to President Trump after he cleared away peaceful protesters for a photo opportunity at a nearby church. Demonstrations over the death of George Floyd at the hands of police continued in several parts of the nation for an 11th straight night. North America correspondent James Glenday has more.
They were up before dawn with litres of yellow paint, trying to send a message to protesters and the president. The result was a 2-block-long mural only metres away from America's executive mansion. And the city's mayor then renamed the prominent section of street Black Lives Matter Plaza.
Our nation is hurting. It's in need of healing and leadership at all levels.
You see what's going on now? The move was partly intended as a pointed rebuke to the White House, which had the area dramatically cleared earlier this week so Donald Trump could pose for photos at a church with a Bible.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
But publicly, at least, the Commander-in-Chief didn't seem fussed by today's developments. Instead, he was basking in surprising economic news.
Today is probably, if you think of it, the greatest comeback in American history, but it's not going to stop here.
Many forecasters had predicted the pandemic would have pushed the US unemployment rate north of 20% by now. Instead, it's fallen from 14.7% to 13.3%. Despite the better-than-expected news, the president still infuriated protesters by suggesting that growing the country's economy is the best way of improving race relations.
I have zero expectations of Donald Trump. He's done what I think everybody thought he would do, which is nothing. I mean, he's driven this country to a point where we're having to be out here in the middle of a pandemic protesting for Black Lives Matter.
The sweeping demonstrations sparked by the killing of African-American man George Floyd continue to be pockmarked by more alleged instances of police brutality. Many violent encounters have been captured on mobile phone cameras.
Concerns are growing too for what these gatherings might mean for the spread of the coronavirus. Several states across America have seen their cases spike after relaxing social distancing restrictions.
We're very concerned that our public health message isn't resonating. We continue to try to figure out how to penetrate the message with different groups.
But there is still no end to the protests in sight. Today, even the NFL admitted it was wrong to stop players taking a knee against racial violence and announced it would start encouraging them to speak out.
No justice! No peace! No justice!
Authorities are now preparing for the possibility this weekend could bring some of the biggest demonstrations so far. James Klingday, ABC News, Washington.
Well, some good news tonight. For the first time since the pandemic began, Victoria has not recorded any new cases of coronavirus in the past day. The Health Minister, Jenny Mikakos, tweeted the news this morning. She said the milestone had been achieved through Victorians doing an incredible job keeping themselves and others safe. But she says the latest public health advice is that the risk is not over yet. Victoria's total number of cases is 1,681, with more than 1,500 of those declared recovered on Friday. The pandemic has exposed how reliant Australian farmers are on other countries for equipment and chemicals used to grow food. With international transport routes closed, it could be harder to get crucial supplies during the harvest later this year. Here's National Regional Affairs reporter Lucy Barber.
Mark Swift always has spare parts for farm machinery in the shed because if something breaks down...
Look, you can conceivably lose $10,000 to $20,000 a day in lost potential just by not having that part.
Most spare machinery parts are made overseas and flown into Australia, so they've been harder to come by lately.
You've only got to look up in the sky at the moment. There's just very few planes.
Farm chemicals have also been in short supply. Australia relies heavily on China to produce glyphosate, the active ingredient in the weed killer Roundup. But shipments stalled due to the pandemic right when a deluge of rain hit the east coast, sending demand for the product soaring.
So whether it's China or other world areas, we are dependent on the outside world.
It's taken a massive disruption to upset supply chains, but the pandemic's shown that things can unravel pretty quickly. The federal government wants Australia to become more self-sufficient, which in agriculture could mean more hunger for Australian-made tools and equipment.
We're absolutely delighted that we've probably increased sales by about 25% over the last 2 months, year on year.
And a push for retailers to keep bigger stockpiles of spare parts and chemicals.
I think we're overly dependent on just-in-time supply chains where no one wants there to be any inventory kept. They want the inventory basically to be in transit and then to be put straight onto the machine as it's required.
All that stands between a productive farm and an idle one. Lucy Barber, ABC News.
And you can see more on that story tomorrow on Landline. Victoria's opposition leader wants the state government to abandon plans for a medically supervised drug injecting room near the Queen Victoria Market. A review found the trial injecting centre that opened in North Richmond in 2018 has been so successful a second is needed, and the government wants it in the CBD. But the opposition is adamant the new centre should not go ahead.
The lives of North Richmond residents have been turned upside down because the centre was in the wrong location. And now Daniel Andrews is going to repeat that mistake by putting it right next to the Queen Vic Market, one of our iconic tourist destinations.
Melbourne's Lord Mayor is also demanding a meeting with the government, saying she wasn't consulted. More than 3,000 overdoses have been treated at the North Richmond facility. The death toll from coronavirus in the United Kingdom has passed 40,000. That now makes it the second worst hit nation after the US.
The day that the number of deaths from coronavirus has gone over 40,000 is a time of sorrow for us all.
A group of scientists has written to the government urging it to reconsider plans to ease restrictions. In South America, the situation continues to worsen in Brazil. It's just had its largest daily increase in fatalities, overtaking Italy with the third highest number of deaths. Well, President Trump is optimistic the latest US job figures will show the economy will recover. Millions of Americans are still unemployed. The speed at which businesses closed during the coronavirus pandemic has revealed just how easy it is to fall from the middle class into poverty. North America correspondent Catherine Diss reports.
Louise Lara was living a comfortable life. Then coronavirus hit. It claimed her job of 15 years and with it, her health insurance.
I am terrified. I am absolutely terrified.
For 3 months, the 54-year-old single mother lived off savings, unemployment checks and food stamps. She's since returned to work on reduced hours, but it's not enough. She's being forced to sell her home to make ends meet.
I know it's not supposed to be, but it's very demeaning and dehumanizing. I really feel like I failed.
In a country hailed for its economic successes in recent years, basic necessities like food, shelter and medical care are suddenly at risk.
Yeah, thank you.
Families wait for hours in lines stretching for kilometres. Many in luxury cars, Mercedes, expensive SUVs and BMWs.
A lot of middle-class families, they have a car, they have a house, but you can't use your house to put food on the table.
Congress passed the biggest economic stimulus package in history to give families financial relief during the pandemic, but the system used to disperse the funds has been unreliable and slow. This is the worst economic crisis to rack this country since the Great Depression of the 1930s and reveals just how close middle America is to financial hardship. 102-year-old Lucille Elson lived through the Great Depression, the Spanish flu pandemic and World War II. She put this in a similar league, but says the 1930s was a far more frugal time.
Work for delayed rewards, we called it, that if you saved your money, you could do something greater with it.
But for many like Louise Lara, the American dream now seems out of reach. The threat of losing it all, just one job loss away. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Washington.
Well, to sport now, and in netball, funding cuts and tough return-to-play guidelines for players could mean that the next generation of talent is lost. Coronavirus restrictions have halted many key pathway programs, and there's uncertainty around some start dates. Here's senior sports reporter Patrick Galloway.
Bianca Chatfield played over 200 games in the National Netball League. She says playing against older girls from the age of 12 was a key to her success.
To your champions, the Melbourne Vixens!
They taught me how to be resilient. They taught me how to be competitive. They taught you the standards that are expected once you start playing at that next level.
In the suburbs, many are following in Chatfield's footsteps.
They're just always pushing me to go harder, like with training, gym, games.
But those in a senior representative team, like 15-year-old Freya Bushby, might not get a game this season.
I was really looking forward to having those new experiences, having that bond with the team, and I feel like, yeah, it's just going to be really disappointing if I can't get back out there and do it all.
A start date for senior netball still hasn't been provided by the states coming out of shutdown, and many are worried that will create serious problems.
A year can make a big difference in a rep player's life. You know, you've got no consistency if we don't have a competition for them.
Netball is a very affordable sport and one that we pride ourselves on the way that we do deliver it. But the situation's quite dire now if we have to give refunds.
To make matters worse, Super Netball's National Feeder League, featuring some of Australia's best teenage talent, was cancelled this week.
I know every state and territory, every Suncorp Super Netball League club is looking at ways that they can adjust their programming to make sure that these athletes still get those development opportunities.
The most important thing for me is that girls get to play the game. So as much as we can, we need to encourage associations and the government to actually give us some guidelines so that that can actually happen.
The National Super Netball competition does have a start date on August 1. Patrick Galloway, ABC News.
Melbourne Storm prop Christian Welch has praised NRL Chairman Peter V'landys for helping the sport move towards a kind of normality. Fans will be allowed to attend NRL games in small groups from next week after an agreement with the New South Wales government. Catherine Murphy has more.
Cardboard cutouts this week.
As the fans go crazy on the sideline.
Real crowds from next week. The NRL keeping a step ahead of the AFL and fulfilling the league boss's aim of crowds by July, which seemed fanciful just a few weeks ago.
Fair few things Peter V'landys has come out and said, I've kind of sat back and gone, I don't think that's actually even possible, but the man keeps coming through for us.
With AFL not resuming until next Thursday, Melbourne Storm has enjoyed a 2-week monopoly of Melbourne's crowded sporting landscape.
Hopefully we've got some more fans. It's been a great opportunity. Some great games have been played, and it's in Melbourne. It's going to be great for the Storm.
The Storm bounced back from their loss to the Raiders last week with a hometown win over the Rabbitohs.
Like clockwork, back in their groove.
But with their 2-week stint at home over, they face a gruelling day trip to the Central Coast to take on Newcastle next weekend.
I think we're going to Sydney and then it's a bus ride up to the Central Coast, so it's going to be a really long day.
Might be a small inconvenience, but by the time we're at the ground and getting onto the field, there's really no excuses. We can't hide behind any of that. We're professional athletes.
By the time Storm return to Amy Park for their Round 7 clash with the Warriors, they may even have more vocal fans to cheer them on. Catherine Murphy, ABC News.
Well, if it wasn't for the global pandemic, our Olympic athletes would now be on the downhill run towards Tokyo, which was supposed to begin late next month. Instead, the postponement of the Games has forced life changes, life challenges, and some surprising new opportunities.
Few Canberra Capitals fans will forget this moment.
Nurse is free for three! Boom!
Or the celebrations that came with the Caps' back-to-back championship. It was just 94 days ago.
It feels so long, like a world away that happened.
Not quite 3 weeks later, Australia was in shutdown. The Opal's first Olympic preparation camp was cancelled. But in a team environment, it's easy to deal with that adversity. For individual athletes, the shutdown and no Olympics meant they were both on their own and in isolation.
I'm actually really proud of the way I've dealt with everything, and I've managed to process it all at a natural pace, and I'm actually more motivated than ever.
The Olympic postponement caught Bowden, a teacher, in a really vulnerable moment.
I was definitely emotional. I remember hearing the announcement about Tokyo while I was actually at school, and knowing that was my last day with my class as well, I was actually quite upset.
The Opals have qualified for Tokyo and so can pick up preparations again later this year, while Bowden still finds herself short of a qualifying time.
Hopefully by the end of the year there will be some athletic events that are available in Australia.
Interstate travel is a big thing. We need that to open up to be able to come together as a national team.
Tolo has delayed plans of one last overseas stint to re-sign with the Canberra Capitals this week. And Bowden, well, teaching wasn't the only way she kept herself busy in isolation.
One of mine was to take up a Cert 4 in marriage celebrancy. So who knows, I might have an even busier summer coming up, not only racing but marrying people.
Tokyo is still no certainty for next year, but both Bowden and Tolo have strong desires that they want to play out on the Olympic stage.
I look at my last Olympic experience, we bombed out, we came 5th, the worst that the Opals had done in 4 or 5 Olympics, and I want that chance of redemption. I want to get back onto the medal podium.
The lure of a 3rd Olympics is pretty large, so I'm hoping that everything will go smoothly towards Tokyo next year and we can get over there, and that would be a really sweet way, I think, to end a great career.
The opportunity to go out on a high, just 12 months later than anticipated. Brett McKay, ABC News, Canberra.
Researchers have used satellite technology to track a critically endangered bird's first migratory flight from Australia to China. The juvenile eastern curlew has spent the last 2.5 years around Queensland's Moreton Bay mudflats getting ready for the epic journey. Daya Clark reports.
When most other eastern curlews migrated north in mid-March, 3-year-old AAJ, as she's known to researchers, remained behind.
And we thought, oh well, sometimes they're a bit immature and they wait yet another year down here before going north.
But 6 weeks later, with a tiny satellite tracker in place, AAJ began her 10-day non-stop flight up the Queensland coast over New Guinea and the Western Pacific Ocean, finally landing on mudflats in China.
It's incredibly exciting. It's an enormous privilege, really, I get quite emotional about it, to have the privilege of being allowed to catch these birds and to look after their health.
The waders usually arrive at breeding grounds in eastern Russia by May, making AAJ's late departure highly unusual.
It's a new discovery about young eastern curlews, that perhaps they do leave later than others, but we'll need more birds to find that out.
The population has declined by more than 80% in the past 30 years, mostly due to the destruction of mudflats where they feed on crustaceans.
We have about 1,400, the very last large flock in Australia, really, here in Moreton Bay.
The area is listed under the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands, which is an international treaty, but there's pressure to upgrade infrastructure at the bay's southern end.
Toondah Harbour serves as the gateway to North Stradbroke Island and has long been in the sights of the Walker Group, which is seeking approval to build a controversial $1.3 billion development.
43 hectares of the development is going to encroach out onto the mudflats, into the Ramsar wetlands. I quantify that as 22 MCG playing fields.
In 2018, a revised plan by Walker Group was given the green light to proceed to the environmental impact statement phase, which the company says will be completed by the end of the year. Meanwhile, AAJ is resting on the mudflats north of Shanghai.
That's where it roosted and that's where it's now feeding. You can see the tracks as it moves around on the mudflat.
Fattening up ahead of her return journey in a few months. Daya Clark, ABC News.
Well, we've had a cloudy start to the long weekend, especially over southern Victoria, but things should soon look brighter, we hope. Chilly again this morning, as low as -4 at Mount Hotham Airport and at Omeo, -2 at Horsham, Longranong and in Rutherglen. Today, low cloud or fog across the south, the northern country and north central Victoria, so only managed to get up to 9 degrees at Shepparton. Some drizzly rain near the coast. Mildura was warmest with 17. The Surf Coast has had 10 millimetres of rain today, 6 millimetres in Geelong. Drizzly in the south, but in Melbourne City no rain has actually registered. A high of 13.3 at 1:08 p.m. and outside the front door right now it's 11 degrees. Freezing and foggy in Canberra first thing today, down to -5. In Cooma, -8. Early showers in Cairns, warm and sunny across in Perth. A weak and slow-moving front is moving across southern Victoria, and that's what's been bringing today's cloud and drizzle. Plenty of high cloud over the nation's southwest. That's ahead of a low and a decaying cold front. For us, a large high will move over Victoria later tomorrow, and it will be in charge of our weather until Thursday. So some settled weather coming up for the first half of next week, and tomorrow just a shower or two over western and southern Victoria. Brisbane, Hobart and Adelaide will all be partly cloudy. In Canberra, mostly cloudy. Some morning showers for Perth and some late showers coming up in Sydney. Back home another night with single-digit low temperatures and for most of us, and the low to mid-teens tomorrow, so not exactly a warm day. Morning fog patches and frost, mainly over the northeast. A shower or two in the south and the west, but they'll contract through to the coast. And there is a frost warning for the northeast tonight. On the bays, a south to southeast wind at 10 to 15 knots. Well, a shower or two in Melbourne tonight and again tomorrow under mostly cloudy skies, although that cloud should clear up a little bit in the afternoon. It will be a chilly day, just 12 degrees, 6 overnight, and we will have light winds. The Queen's birthday holiday Monday will be very cold for the early morning bike warriors, a frosty 2 degrees and then a partly cloudy 13. Tuesday, another 2 degree morning with fog around, then some mostly sunny skies and 15. Partly cloudy Wednesday, 15 degrees, and again on Thursday, 13, although the slight chance of a shower then. Friday, 15 degrees, and Saturday, 16 with a late shower. And that's all for now from the team here in Melbourne. Enjoy the rest of your night and the long weekend.